Brother Patrick, you want to go first? You raised your hand.
Sure.
What you got?
I'm sorry, I was being a little over the top.
It's okay.
No, we were talking about it in Bible study back home. We got to the portion of Torah where it talks about not mixing materials in garments, not linen and wool specifically. And I couldn't recall, I know I'd studied it in the past, but I didn't have my notes with me, and I couldn't recall the best way to interpret what was being said there. And we got off on a couple of side discussions on the topic, but I would like to get your take on that.
Yeah. So there's two places in the Torah that mentions not mixing of the garments. One is Leviticus 19:19.
Yep.
The other one I think is Deuteronomy 22 verse 11. And one thing we kind of just get settled right here at the outset is that the command is specific on wool and linen.
Yeah.
So in my younger years of Torah study, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I read it in one of the verses in just an English Bible, and it sounded like you can't mix any garment.
Right.
But when you look at the Hebrew word is sha'atnez, and it means like a linsey woolsey. So my understanding is, based on further study, that it wasn't that garment was altogether forbidden for everyone, but that garment was specifically for the priesthood and for the fabric inside the tabernacle. I think I can show you, and I mentioned this, I did a study on tzitzit not long ago, and I could send it to you. Yep. But I think I can show you how that a mixture of wool and linen garment on a fabric was specified for holy use in tabernacle and priest. And so what Yahweh is telling the common Israelite not to do is, you're not to wear this. This is just for my tabernacle and my Levite priesthood. Okay. But there's one exception, I think. And that's with the tassels. And if you look at the Aramaic Targum between Deuteronomy 22:11 and 12, 11 says, don't mix wool and linen. And then 12 says, except on the tassels, I'm going to let you do this. The understanding is Yahweh gives us one garment whereby all of us are considered priests in the community.
Okay.
But we're not allowed to mix it on any garment. So their white thread, because dye was expensive back then,
Sure.
Their white thread was linen, and their blue thread was dyed wool.
Yeah.
So that's my understanding. Josephus in his writings talks about, when he quotes the law, he says, don't mix a garment of linen and woolen, comma, for that is reserved for the priests.
Right.
So that's my understanding.
Yeah, and I think that as you started talking through it, that's where I started recalling some of those past conversations. On the tzitzit topic, though, are you to then make the tzitzits from linen and wool, or it's just allowable to do so?
I think that the ancient understanding was, yes, that's how you used to make the tzitzit. Okay. But I hadn't understood this, but for the last couple of years, you just progress. You continue to study. You're open to more understanding, and so that doesn't mean I condemn everybody that doesn't do it that way. It's just you progress.
My paracord tzitzits out here.
Yeah. One lady, I think, messaged me on TikTok the other day and said she was going to make a tzitzit with a horsehair. But I think about that, and I said, I think I'm just going to leave that one alone, sister. Because I don't want to condemn anybody that's trying to serve the Creator, whether they're just starting out or So, I think it's wonderful that she's wanting to make tzitzits. Right. So, but yeah. So, anybody else on that subject, or we can move on to another question or topic. We're doing a free-for-all today, folks. So, hey, anything you want to ask. The only dumb question is the one not asked. So, Sister Jessica.
So on tzitzits, I know that you've seen the debate. Is it like the tassels like you're wearing, or is it the ones that go all the way around the bottom of your tunic? You know what I mean? The priests that go all the way around. What's your idea on that anciently and tzitzit in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, some of the Hebrew Israelite community would wear fringes like across their whole border, that's what Sister Jessica's saying. And what they would say is the command about the four corners or quarters in Deuteronomy 22 and 12, that command is like an idiom or a figure of speech meaning all the way around. Like when it talks about the four corners of the earth, it means all the way around the earth. So there again, if somebody says this is how I understand it, I would say I respect that view. I personally think, based upon findings of garments, Semitic garments, that that's probably not accurate. There is like paintings and inscriptions on walls where the Hebrews and their garments were shown, and they would come down into what we call actual four corners, or they would piece like at the hem. At the hem, they would kind of just spread out there at the bottom, and it would make like four actual corners. So I think the best way to wear the tzitzit is on a tunic or a robe that has the slits on the sides at the four corners. But there again, I wouldn't teach it as a commandment, from the pulpit.
You would see either way as fulfillment of the
Yeah.
commandment.
Somebody walked in here and they said, my understanding is all the way around. I'd say, hey, we disagree, but that's okay. Yeah, we need to get to the point in the Torah community where we respect people who follow Torah, but maybe have a little bit different understanding on how to apply that commandment in their life, instead of being so rigid. When we get so rigid, it's like we get Pharisaical, where we think our interpretation is the only one that is right. So, that's a great question, sister. I've thought about
So
it.
you do think that ancient Israelites wore more like your tassel or my tassel
I do.
type deal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and in my recent Bible study we did on tzitzit, there's a section I go over where I'll show the pictures on the screen. I can get that for you. Yeah, great question. Anybody else? Sister Janet.
So in Genesis 3 it talks about Nehesh,
Yes.
serpent.
Yes.
And so it talks. There's only that particular being is only in certain parts of Scripture, and then in Job, it talks about the word Satan as an adversary, which a lot of times those two terms are not linked up to the same person.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. So the word Nachash or Nehesh in Genesis 3 literally means like shining one.
Yes.
I do think that it was either Satan himself, the arch enemy of Yahweh, or some kind of entity or being that Satan was working through in agency. The verse I like to go to is in Revelation 12, and I know we're going all the way to the back of the book now, but I think when we read progressive revelation, it never contradicts previous revelation, but it can make it blossom like a flower. So in Revelation, it talks about that old dragon who is called the devil and the serpent. And I think that's who deceived Adam and Eve in the garden. Some people think it was a literal snake, and that he could have been speaking through a literal snake, and that animals prior to the fall of the Garden of Eden actually talked. There's evidence for this in some extra biblical books like Jubilees and Jasher, things like that. But no, I think it was the devil, the Satan. Every time we see the word Satan in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean the arch enemy. It can mean the adversary. The angel of Yahweh is called Satan in Numbers 22 when he withstood the donkey, But I think there are some texts. We don't want to go too far, because there are definitely some texts where you really can't understand it unless it's a supernatural spiritual being. Like when Michael and his angels went to war against the dragon and his angels. Well, Michael is an archangel, and he has angels under him. Well, who's this dragon with angels under him? I think context would tell us that it has to be a being that's equal with Michael, supernatural being that has angels under his authority.
So you think that the Satan in Job is the same as the great dragon or the serpent?
I do. Yeah, I don't think it's a human adversary in Job. I think it is a immortal spiritual being in Job. Yeah, good question, sister. Yeah.
On that same topic, I remember pointing this out the other day when I was reading it, that it seems that the snake, the serpent in Genesis, is cursed to crawl on its belly in the dust forever. which would indicate that it didn't prior to that moment, right? If it's now henceforth you're cursed, what was he doing before then? Was he on two legs? Did he have arms? Did he walk around? What was the situation? And then you pointed out the correlation to Revelation. It speaks of him as that old dragon. It makes me wonder if, he didn't walk on all fours and was like a shiny, like the Asian dragon or something to that effect. I don't know. I've always linked those two together similarly, like you were just talking about. But
Yeah.
curious about what did he do before he crawled on his belly? Did he
Yeah.
walk in there on 2 feet, or what was he doing?
Yes, it's great thoughts, man. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure.
I have a comment.
Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
So what I've found with that particular phrase is a Hebrew idiom because there's a really good paper that Michael Heiser did
Yeah.
in reference to the Nehesh being a cherubim, and that cherubim then bright shiny one rebelled and then was then pushed to earth. So it's a Hebrew idiom that he is then now cursed to be here on earth. And so that's why I was curious what your thoughts.
That's a great paper.
Joe.
I've read that paper. That's a good paper. Yeah.
So
Maybe.
that's just one way. That was never actually quote a serpent, but a being made by Yahweh in terms of a cherubim, which are very powerful.
Yeah, sure. Still a supernatural being. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The cherubim was placed when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. There was a cherubim, I think maybe two, placed there with a flaming sword. So they are definitely. It's not a human entity.
Yeah.
It's definitely a spiritual entity. Yeah.
Anyway, that's.
Oh, that's great. Good question. Anybody else? Sister Caitlin, I lost your name there for a second.
This is random. I didn't hear what we're doing, but it sounds like just random comments or
Sure.
topics.
Sure.
But I thought it was interesting. The girls now are reading in school. I guess it was last week, the week before, in Genesis 18. Whenever Yahweh and the men come and tell Abraham that they're going to have a child, and let's see. Abraham also reigned of the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it. Oh wait, hold on, back up. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes." And then, of course, they make the fine calf and food. And I thought it was interesting. Then later, whenever they're in the town with Lot, the 2 men are with Lot in Sodom, and it says, "Yet he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate." So I just thought it was interesting how within 1 chapter of each other, Sarah and Abraham were making kneaded bread cakes, versus the next chapter was unleavened. But I guess maybe because they were going to also prepare a calf, you'd have time to prepare a calf and enough time for bread cakes, versus unleavened bread was quickly. So I just thought it was interesting, just since we're here, with these unleavened bread, it just was very timely to see that they eat bread cakes and they eat unleavened bread. So they apparently eat 2 kinds, and I just wasn't sure why the unleavened was mentioned versus the bread cakes. So
Yeah.
it was very.
Yes, that's a good observation. Some people actually think that the feasts in some way existed back in Genesis. I'm of the opinion that they didn't, but it's possible. Some kind of feast, People think that there is some extra biblical material, like when Abraham offered up the ram instead of Isaac. They think that was at Passover time.
Okay.
Jubilees mentions that. But then some people think that the reason they made unleavened bread was just because she wanted to do something quick.
Yeah. That's what,
Yeah.
The previous chapter, he got a calf.
Uh-huh.
And you can't prepare a calf to feed somebody quickly.
No.
It would take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Enough time to make a loaf of bread or some cakes. So I just thought it was interesting that they specify between the 2 kinds of bread.
Yeah. It's good. Brother Tony.
I've got a question about the how in the New Testament it says that Yeshua is the stumbling block, the stone of stumbling for the Jewish people.
Right.
What would you view that? I've heard some different things. Some people said it's the Trinity.
Yeah, I definitely don't believe it's the Trinity.
Because, I mean, considering what we read in the Gospels, I mean, there was thousands of Jews that believed in Yeshua.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, even some historical people I've looked into said, I mean, it was hundreds of thousands.
yeah,
The whole sect of the Nazarene movement was a large movement.
yeah.
So,
There's a parable, you know the parable of the vineyard, when you have the vineyard owner, and he plants this vineyard, and he puts these people in charge of it, and then he, sends the servants, and then they kill the servants and all that. Matthew 21, the whole thing. And then at the end of that, the vineyard owner says, in the parable, he says, well, I think I'll send my son. Surely they'll respect him.
yeah.
And then when the son shows up, they say, aha, this is the heir. Let's kill him and take his inheritance. So they kill him and throw him out of the vineyard. And it said, after Yeshua spoke that parable, it says that the chief priests and the elders knew that he was talking about them. And then he quotes, I think he's from the Psalms or maybe Isaiah, the stone that the builders rejected has become the chief stone of the corner. This is Yahweh's doing. Behold, it's marvelous in our eyes. Blessed is he that cometh in the name Yahweh. I think it's Psalm 118, maybe verse 22 through 26, somewhere right in there. So I think what all he's saying is, I'm the promised Messiah, and the religious leaders, not every single individual one, but as a whole, the religious leaders of Judah rejected Yeshua as the Messiah. Obviously, we know not every single individual Israeli rejected Yeshua as the Messiah. No. But the religious leaders are the ones. They were the ones. I mean, you look at the Gospels. We've been reading the Gospel of John now at Shabbat service, and we read Matthew, Mark, and Luke before that. And it's the guys up in the highest echelon. They don't like him. I think it was because he was kind of a renegade. He was kind of a rebel. He didn't go along with Pharisees exactly, or Sadducees exactly, or Essenes or Zealots exactly.
Yeah.
But he kind of said, look, I'm the main man. I'm the chief guy. There's a greater than Jonah standing in front of you.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that has the right interpretation of the Torah. I'm Yahweh's son. I'm it. I'm the stone. You can either build on me, or I can crush you to powder. So I don't think we got to read Trinity or any kind of develop Christology into that. I think he's just saying, I'm the promised Messiah. I can be a stone to crush you, or I can be a stone that you can have as a foundation. Makes sense.
Yeah, and then also I heard another theory on that, which I think I agree with what you said, but also that Christ crucified was also a stumbling block for them. They didn't comprehend.
Yeah.
Because I've been trying to find throughout the Tanakh, I can see things that allude to it, but I don't see anything that's just clear as day. Because you see Yeshua talking to his disciples, and he's like, it says he unlocked their minds to understand the scriptures, all things pertaining to him. And it's just like, okay, well, cool. Can you unlock my mind? Because I want to be able to see those things. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of things that are lost that we don't comprehend from our side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That back then they would have radically understood. I mean, when Paul goes to the Bereans and it says they go back and check everything he said and found it was true. Well, then, if it's that easy. Go back to the Tanakh to find these things pertaining to Yeshua, you would think the Jewish people would look in the Tanakh, and instead of just rejecting Christianity, at least looking at the man Jesus, or Yeshua, and in the Gospels, and looking in the Tanakh to be able to, well, yeah, this is the man, right?
No, I understand what you're saying. Some things I think are spiritually discerned. It's like when we see something like as simple as don't eat pork, and we show somebody, and it's black and white, and they have a block in their mind because of modern Christian doctrine, and they genuinely, some of them see it, but some people genuinely can't get past that block until the light bulb comes on one day, and they think, oh, okay, well the new can't contradict the old. Yahweh's not going to say one thing here and say something different here. So I think it's the same way with Yeshua. Peter in his sermon in Acts chapter 2 on Shavuot, he quotes what? He quotes from Psalm 16 about Yeshua, Psalm 110 about Yeshua. I mean, everything he's pulling from the Tanakh. And 3,000 Israelis got baptized that day. Yeah, but how many more rejected him? So everybody doesn't always see it, and everybody doesn't see it at the same time. Yeah, it's good. That's good. Good topic and question, Tom. Anybody else on that, or any other question you'd like to ask? And I don't have to be the only one to answer. But if you'd like to ask me, you say, "Boy, I've been wanting to ask Brother Matthew something. Now's your time."
Let's talk about ducks and geese.
Okay, we can.
Because we were having this conversation also at home. In fact, so we get a couple Bible studies a week. We get the Sabbath Bible study with my family, not just the household, and then we get the friends and family that come on over on Thursdays and whatnot. But this was, I think, a family one, and we were talking about the different birds that were of the water that were considered not food and food, and
Sure.
we were having a little trouble trying to figure it out. We don't really actually eat goose or duck most of the time anyway, so it's never really a big issue. But we kind of want to know where everybody stands on that topic, because it seems like there's a little bit of gray area in there.
Yeah. So I taught a sermon one time. I titled it, "Is Duck on Yahweh's Menu?" And I laid out all the information that I could gather. And then at the end of the sermon, I said, "I'm not sure." And I still feel that way. So my motto is, when in doubt, do without. So for me, I choose not to eat duck. That doesn't mean that I would preach from the pulpit that it was unclean. I'm genuinely not sure. When it comes to the birds in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, we're not given specificity. We're just given a list of unclean birds.
Yeah.
Some of those Hebrew words are hard to be able to decipher into English.
Yeah.
One thing that helps us tremendously is the Greek Septuagint, because Greek words are a little bit easier to discern than ancient Hebrew words in identifying certain animals. So there's debate. Anything that somebody might say, that's a duck, there's debate. There's no consensus on, yes, that's definitely referring to a duck. We talked about this one time at Sukkot, and Brother TJ brought up something, and I thought it was good. All of the birds that are listed on the unclean list, or let's say most of them, predatory birds.
Yeah.
And so TJ said that there's, in the duck world, there's like diving ducks, predator ducks, and then there's mallards, or like basically waterfowl, like chickens.
Wading
That
ducks,
and they just pick like chickens.
Yeah.
And he said there might be a difference there. So, what I encourage people to do is do the research. I can get you my sermon. It's an old sermon, but I've got a lot of information. Do the research on your own, and just be honest. Be honest with what you see, and follow what you see. Don't try to cut corners. But I choose not to eat it. But I can't sit here and tell you that it's unclean, because I don't know for sure.
Yeah, we made the same distinction at home between diving birds and what I would call wading birds. Birds that just wade around through the water, maybe dunk their head once in a while, but there was I couldn't tell my kids, yep, we can eat these ducks and we can eat these geese, but these other ones we can't eat a loon, can't eat the Minnesota State bird, but we can eat all these other. I couldn't do it. So
yeah, I would encourage, on the dietary laws as a whole, I always encourage everybody to stick with the instructions, because some people start branching out and saying, well, this animal does this or has this kind of makeup in its throat or stomach or whatever, when Yahweh just gives us plain instructions. Because there's some animals, like, look at a horse. A horse just eats grass and oats, man. You would think maybe it would be on the clean list, but it's not.
Doesn't have a split hoof.
Yes, exactly. It doesn't have a split hoof. So we stick with the simple and plain instructions, and realize Father knows best, and we trust Him.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm sorry I couldn't be more helpful.
No.
I can get you my sermon, though.
I quite honestly, I half expected your answer to be pretty similar to the one that I gave my kids, but I was hoping there might be something additional added to it, but I can't even honestly remember. I've been listening to your stuff for so long, I can't honestly remember what's my own original thoughts and what stuff I've already heard you say.
Yeah. That sermon was a long time ago. So.
Yeah.
I have one.
Sister
We're
Jessica.
talking about dietary.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not to eat the fat. What portions of that? Is that any fat that would be marbled into a steak, or is it just the ones around? Like, I know it's debatable in the community. I've heard a lot of back and forth on it, and I just want to know everybody's thoughts on that.
Yeah. My understanding is, based on Leviticus chapter 3 and Leviticus chapter 7, there's specified fat portions that belong to Yahweh. And each time that it's listed, don't eat this, but give it to Yahweh, it talks about the fat that is around the entrails or the inner organs. So when you open up an animal, there's this like special looking fat that people make soaps and candles and stuff out of. And then it'll mention like the fatty tail. And you've seen fat tail sheep where they got that nub for a tail on the back. And that's just like one big thing of fat. I think that's what Yahweh is referring to right there. Not the fat that's marbled inside the meat.
Right.
I think he's talking about that special fat that belongs to him. If I'm not mistaken though, maybe in Leviticus 7, there's a verse that says that there are some things on some common slaughters that you can use that fat for. Let's look at it real quick. Let me see Leviticus 7.
Are you saying that every time you slaughter an animal, of course you can't eat that, but you're to offer that as in a burnt offering to you?
I think for sure on a sacrificial animal.
Okay.
But look, this verse in Leviticus 7, it's Leviticus 7:22 through 25. It says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, tell the Israelites you are not to eat any fat. That fat is described earlier in the chapter. I have a note here, 7 and Leviticus 3. Of an ox, a sheep, or a goat, verse 24. The fat of an animal that dies naturally or is mauled by wild beasts may be used for any purpose, but you must not eat it. So there are some animals died naturally, mauled by a wild beast. I'm going to throw out here now, and I'm not for sure, but maybe a common slaughter, like a blemished animal that you wouldn't offer sacrifice, but you'd slaughter in common. You might could use that fat, not for eating, but use it like for candle making or something like that. And then he says, if anyone eats animal fat from the fire offering presented to Yahweh, the person who eats it must be cut off from his people. So on the sacrifices, whether it be, burnt, peace offering, sin offering, any of the sacrifices, you definitely don't eat that fat, and it looks like it's offered up on the altar to Yahweh. But on a naturally died animal mauled, and maybe a common slaughter, you could use the fat for purposes other than eating.
What would you do with the common slaughter? With the fat from that animal?
I'd probably offer it on the altar. That's probably what I'd do. Until I studied more and knew better, I'd be safe and just, because I knew, I would know that it wouldn't be wrong for me to give it to Yahweh.
It wouldn't be wrong to do it.
Yep.
But it might be wrong to withhold it if you should.
Might be, yeah. I won't say that it is, but we do know specified right here, an animal that dies of itself or is mauled, we know for sure you can use that fat for purposes other than eating. You don't have to put it on the altar.
What about with your soap making and candle making, using like for instance, lard from the unclean animal for soap?
So I don't think that it's a sin to use unclean animals in products other than putting it in your mouth to consume it. So like I wouldn't be against a brush with pork bristles. I wouldn't be against touching a football. I think the dietary commands is specifically about eating the animal. So I don't think it's wrong for soap either. I don't. And but that's me. That's my understanding. I think you can use. I think Yahweh loves pigs. I think He loves horses and dogs, but they're just not on the menu to eat. And so they have uses. A pig can be used for garbage disposal or a rototiller. A horse can be used for a lawnmower or transportation, but they're not. They're not to
And
be.
the reason why I went to that question about the unclean animals, the fact is because when we was talking about offering fat portions of a common slaughtered clean animal, I was like, well, what would people do for their soaps, for their candles, if all that is offered? Then I reverted to, well, maybe the unclean animals, that would be what people done.
That's a great thought, Jessica. I've never thought about that. That's a great thought. Very good.
On that topic, so the specific fat is the cheleb. Now, that made me just think, well, what about ground beef? How do we know that cheleb's not in it, like ground beef?
Yeah, you need to check.
So we technically, for ground beef, it needs to be kosher then.
Well, you not necessarily. You can check with, like, for instance, if let's say you have a cow that's raised, and you know how it's being slaughtered by one guy, it's one cow, and you know that he's not mixing the inner fats with the ground beef, then you're okay.
Yeah.
So something doesn't have to be like technically kosher.
No, I'm talking about like me going to Publix and buying their ground beef. I don't know where their fat came from, what beef fat they're using.
You would check with the manufacturer, or you could do without it, or you could call and talk to somebody and check with the manufacturer. Say, hey, how do y'all process the ground beef?
Right.
Yeah, just be careful. You know.
Would that be the same with ground turkey?
I don't. Anybody else want to? I'm not sure. Does turkey work the same way?
I think the turkey, for the most part, is like very, very lean to the point they don't add any fats. I think.
No, it's usually 93% in most
So
cases.
that's the assumption.
But on the topic of the beef, Brother Tony, was your question. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
anybody
go
off.
ahead.
What I do know about meat packing is that usually it's the suet because it's the largest chunks of fat.
Okay.
And what they do is it's easy to portion out that way to make this is 80-20, this is 85-15, 90-10, so on and so forth. So I'm not saying they never include the fat that we're not supposed to eat, but most of the time, think of it as like economies of scale and efficiency at the workplace. They're not going to go, oh, let's carve off this little hunk of fat off the liver here, and they're just going to grab the suet because it's a big giant block and whack it up and throw it in
No,
there.
that's what I was gonna say, cause, so the girls and I get a cow from a local I know the lady that grows a cow, and then we went to the meat processing to watch them, and they literally, you've got the whole cow hanging out there, and, just literally cut off a leg and throw some meat through the grinder, and it's done. So I would think they would have to go above and beyond to find the fat that we're not
Yeah.
supposed to eat, cause
Yeah.
I think it would be way extra effort to throw that in there.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, but again, I've not been to a grocery store process, but the guys that do ours, they just chop off the meat and throw it in the grinder.
yeah, we got, in Minnesota, people, they're like their sausages. There's lots of delis and things like that make their own. Kamarchek's is one of them that they serve at the Twins games and stuff like that, the baseball games. And they show you, they've even been on television showing the process. They grab a big chunk of suet or whatever, and they cube it up, they weigh it out versus the lean meat, and then they throw it in, they mix everything together. And it's a pretty old, like, world technique, and so I don't think it's super common that people would just be throwing every piece of fat they can find on the animal in there, but not to say it's not a perfect science. But
When you say
anyhow,
suet, what do you mean by suet?
that's that really hard on a cow. The really hard like block of fat that you get out of there. Like when we get ours from the farmer in Wisconsin, it's all we're blessed. We get all grass fed, grass finished beef, and he'll give us the suet and the bones and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a big, hefty block of fat that comes off the cow. I'll be honest, I don't even know exactly where it comes from, but I don't think it's not the same fat we're talking about.
It's usually from the belly.
Yeah.
A cow generally that you're going to get like at Publix or Kroger's or something like that, that's a big operation, and I have a weird connection to that. And so every cow that's born is got from nose to tail, it's already sold into completely different kinds of markets. So typically speaking, when it's ground and the suet and the cow, that's coming from the belly, and it's just they put it right in there, and it's nothing that's coming off of the liver fat, the entails, all of that's already sold, already figured out, already manufactured out. So it's not going to be in the ground beef 80-20, that type of thing. Typically, farmers are different, but the manufacturing of the major of that meat, nope, everything is sold.
I
On the
think
eyes.
weird like that because then like I was cracking eggs one day and I saw some blood in my egg and I was like, I've got to throw all these eggs out. Because I cracked it into a bowl with other eggs.
Oh, I see.
And I was like, I can't remember because all the blood just
I
like.
see.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have been blood. Like, so we're not allowed to eat the
A
blood
living
that's
thing.
in the vein of the animal. When you cut the
Yeah.
lady's neck, that's the blood that's giving it life. When you crack open the egg, what little bit of red you see would potentially be the very, very beginning stages of potentially a fertile egg. But there's no, it would have to eat, so whatever.
This was a dime size, like it was a lot of blood. I was
But
like,
even then, that's not giving life to anything.
Okay.
Like, it's the lifeblood we can't eat.
Mm.
So what little bit of blood that you would have seen would have been the very, very, very beginning stages of a baby chicken.
It's not really even, the
Yeah,
blood is
yeah.
not really even the beginnings of a baby chicken.
Yeah, like
What happens to form those blood spots is when the chicken is forming the egg,
Oh,
she can have
that's true.
something happen in
I didn't
her
think about that.
where she busts a blood
Because
vein.
She has the yolks in her body. She's born with all of the eggs.
All the
and then she
eggs,
forms-
yeah, and whenever the eggs are hardening, one of the blood veins in the chicken may burst and creates a spot before the shell hardens.
I always thought
Because you can get those in unfertilized eggs. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the
That's
egg
good
being
to know. I would've
fertilized.
thought
Yeah, because the egg isn't hard.
And it
until
doesn't
it's
mean the
on
egg
your
is
head.
bad.
No,
It's
no,
just
yeah,
something that happened within the
I never thought
mom.
about that because I always
Yeah.
thought it was like my rooster.
And it happens
caused
more
the
commonly
red
in
spot.
brown eggs than in white eggs for some reason, but
Yeah.
it's
I don't
usually
get them a lot.
in the breed of chicken
That's good to know.
versus.
And I'll add this real quickly. It's really neat. I didn't know this until this year actually. But Tisha's right. It's more common in brown egg layers. And so I always, for that reason, got white egg layers.
Yeah.
And I fed a commercial feed from the store. That's what I always fed. And then now this year, just for research and health reasons, I barely feed any feed from the store. As little as I can. I mainly do free range and then like my scraps and just whatever. And I have brown egg layers now. And it is like, used to I would get, let's say, 5 out of 10 eggs at least would have that red blood spot when I feed commercial feed to my brown egg layers. Now I might get 1 in every 20
Yeah.
that has a brown red spot in it feeding a better.
It's because the hens
feed
are
quality.
healthier,
Yeah.
and so they're not rupturing blood veins like they normally would. Yeah.
That's good to know. We learned from today.
So
But-
to eat
but
or
you
not
can
to
eat
eat?
it. Yeah, you can eat it.
There's nothing wrong with eating it. You're
I don't
cooking
think
it.
there's anything.
Because even then, that'll be a ruptured blood vein, not like an artery. Like
It's not like you're pouring the blood out and drinking it.
Yeah.
That's
It-
or making blood pudding.
Blood pudding, blood
Yeah.
sausage,
Blood
blood
sausage.
cakes.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to have traces of blood. When it says don't eat the blood thereof, it's not talking about like eating the meat. You're cooking the blood in the meat unless you get every single drop out. It's talking about collecting it and making
Like when it
something.
Meat,
Pour out.
meat
out
blood
of
isn't
that,
even the same
you know.
thing.
It's how you
called
slaughter the
myoglobin.
animal.
It's how you slaughter it and what you do with the blood
Like
that comes out of it.
Yesterday we slaughtered the Passover lamb and the blood drains out, and as the blood drains out, the animal loses its life. That's the blood that we're not to eat. It's red meat though. Now a sheep's not as red meat as a cow. So the more red meat, you're going to have a red tint. People say, well, you got to cook the steak well done. And I'm thinking, if it's blood, then you're just eating well done blood.
Yeah.
But that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to how the animal is killed and bled out. Yeah. I mean, if you don't feel comfortable eating the egg, toss it. I
It's
don't
just
eat it.
freaky.
It's freaky. I
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
if it had a big spot either.
And so
But
then I started like
It's
breaking them
nothing.
individually into
Like
another
bone.
cup and pouring them in the chicken.
That's fine. You could do
I would
that.
recommend doing
Just,
that.
it's the mind, in my mind. I'm
That's
looking
good.
at it and I'm like, ah.
Just scramble it up next
But that
time.
is a
and
good
we'll
practice.
see. Be all right.
we get the egg
I'm just
stip it
continuing
out.
to start it. I didn't know, like, just for,
Young lady.
hey, that was a weird situation.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
I eat this or do I throw it away? Let's throw it away.
Wouldn't that also fall into the what Paul said about when you and I can't like when you go to someone's house to eat, that if you don't ask the person that you're sitting with, did you strangle that animal for the sacrifice? And does that fall in that particular category?
Yeah, I think it could. I think Paul's not talking about obvious things. Like somebody sets a piece of pork chop in front of me, I would tell them, I'm sorry, but I don't observe the dietary law. But if there's something that's questionable, then that may be something Paul is talking about where you're not sure. You know what I'm saying? It's a good thought. It's a very good thought. Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8 thing.
Thank you for the verses.
Yeah.
With that being said, what she said, Paul says something about if you go to a Jew or a Greek's house and they offer you food, don't resist anything.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: was pork even a hot commodity being eaten in the first century?
Right.
Because I've heard a lot of people talk about that and say they refrain because of lack of refrigeration and stuff like that.
You could say the same thing about beef too on the refrigeration thing.
Yeah.
I think the context of 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14 is meats offered to idols. That's the context.
Right.
And there's never a specific Torah command against eating meat offered to idols. The closest that you'll get is Exodus 34, which is the second giving of the tablets, the second tablets. There at the end, he says, don't join to worship the idols of the Canaanites. And they might invite you to their feast and you be bid to worship the idol. So that's the closest thing that comes to not eating meat offered to idols. And oftentimes eating the meat offered to the idol, just like we took communion the other night, we identify with our Messiah, with his Father. Well, you're at this ceremony. You're eating, it's fellowship, it's community, you're worshiping the idol. What Paul is saying is like, when you're going shopping in the meat market or you're at this person's house and it's possible that maybe that meat might have been offered to an idol before it was chopped up and sold or something like that, but you're not sure, go ahead and eat it. Don't ask any questions for conscience sake,
That makes me think of, so my mom works at Brooklyn High School, and they serve halal burgers. But to me, like, I would eat a halal burger because, like, for you to call it halal means nothing to me other than it's clean. It's halal for you, but it's not halal for me, but it's clean. So that's in that situation.
But they acknowledge they worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So
Yeah, but I was saying, but as far as like halal though, like I feel like that's, to me, I don't need it to be halal, but I can eat it. I can eat it though it's halal because it's clean. So that's what I was saying. Like if somebody says, well, this chicken was offered to some idol, but it's like it's just chicken.
The halal stand transcends. Oh, go ahead, honey. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the same thing you're gonna say. So
What you said.
the halal just means that this animal has been slaughtered by a person, not like a bunch of not like
Oh really?
machines
Really?
and like
I'm
everything has been cut at once. It's been like actually they halal just means they said in what they say in Arabic, Bismillah, and then which means
Allah is the Arabic word for God.
yeah.
So it's almost like a kosher slaughter.
Yeah,
but
it's
just like a
been
person took
somebody
care of
actually
the animal.
killed
And
it.
Thanks be to God. I think
Yeah.
it's pretty much how Bismillah
So
is.
that's somebody who
translated.
was Muslim
Yeah.
killed it, and which it doesn't matter for us because as long as they kill, that's the same like
Yeah, that's
You go on YouTube,
Yeah.
it's very similar to how we did it yesterday.
yeah.
They had the goat, cover the eyes, across the throat.
but it's
I would
exactly the
consider it like going into like a Thai food or Chinese restaurant where they offer the food to Buddha or
Yeah.
something like that. You know what I
But you
mean?
still eat it because
But you don't. If you have a problem with that, don't ask a question, or
Yeah.
because if your conscience bothers you, you don't need to be eating it.
obviously, yeah.
So that's what it's saying. If you're going to one of these type of person's house
Yeah.
and you're not sure if they've done what you know that they would normally do, if they're doing an offering or whatever, you're not supposed to ask, or either don't eat.
We're just don't eat.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
With that being said, can we put in for a revision of the Bible and take Paul's letters and only offer that to members of the clergy instead of the laymen? Because I can see how the confusion. It's like a big stumbling block for people if you don't understand the context.
It really
Somebody
is.
who's reading the Bible is going to read it and say, "Yeah, see, Paul says I can eat whatever I want, meat sacrifice to idols,
Yeah.
do whatever I want."
And Paul does say, like in 1 Corinthians 10, 2 chapters later, he says, don't eat the things the Gentiles sacrifice, for they sacrifice to demons and not to Yahweh. But in that context, and in the Acts 15 context, and in the Revelation context, where he mentions Jezebel and meats offered to idols, it's always dealing with idol worship. It's like I said, you're going to worship an idol and having a sacrificial meal, acknowledging that God. That's a whole different ballgame. I would teach people, no, don't do that. But if you're eating meat at a person's house or you're buying something, and you don't know whether or not it's been sacrificed to an idol, don't ask no questions. The earth is Yahweh's and the fullness thereof. All right.
This is a great testimony to why we need good teachers. For all those who say the Holy Spirit leads me and teaches me,
I think it's participation in their ceremonies
Yeah.
versus
That makes sense.
just having a meal, a common meal.
Morgan?
I missed what you just said.
Uh-huh.
Papa saying something, Katie. Or did you just say that if you knew it was sacrificed to
an idol that maybe did not partake. Is that what you said?
I wouldn't. If I knew, if I knew for a fact that something had been sacrificed to an idol, no, this is me. I personally wouldn't. I'm not saying that it would be wrong though,
Okay.
because you're not participating in the act of worshiping that mighty one.
Don't be present.
So that's just something. That's just something personal to me. But no, I think exactly what Tisha just said. I think it's the ceremonial worship of the mighty one in the sacrificial meal. So we wouldn't all go over there to the Hindu temple and participate in their holy meal, just like they wouldn't come here and do communion and Pesach with us, because those things identify with the mighty one of Israel and Israel's Messiah. You see what I'm saying? So those are not just meals for us; they're covenant meals. You see, Morgan?
What about going over to somebody's house for dinner and they're not cooking you something unclean, but you know that they cook unclean food in their
Yeah.
pots and their pans and their dishes? Would be the same.
Okay, so that's a great question. Now, let me give you a couple of perspectives on that. It is possible, if you read Leviticus 11, and I taught a sermon on this one time, it's possible that at the end of Leviticus 11, when it talks about the pots and the pans, it is not referring to domestic animals that are unclean, but it's referring to varmints like rats.
The Black Plague.
Yeah, things like that that would get into cupboards and pots and pans. Now, you kind of see what I'm saying? So it might not be wrong. I don't need anybody misquote me here. So I've got to think about this further, but there's a possibility that it might not be wrong to eat out of a pan that something like pork or shrimp has been cooked in previously, and then the pan's been washed. It could be just referring to those varmints that get in cupboards, because he mentions them. It's like there's a separation in Leviticus 11 where he starts to mention these varmint creatures that you would find in your rice bag, or you would find when you open the cupboard, like a mouse or a rat or something like that, or a bug, like that. So that's possible. So right now, though, I'm saying I'd have a hard time eating at somebody's house that I knew, didn't care about what was cooked and what was cooked in that. I'm just telling
Just
you.
even their dishes.
Yeah.
Their pot. And any restaurant you go to, you
Yeah,
can't be in
that's
the kitchen.
The restaurants, the fryers, like for instance, they'll make our steaks on the same grill.
Chicken and shrimp in the same
What I'm suggesting, and I know this, what I'm suggesting is that based on a technical reading of Leviticus 11, that may not be wrong. If just go back and read Leviticus 11, and at the end you'll notice all of a sudden, boom, he mentions these animals that are creepy crawly that would get into pots and pans. He's not talking about horses or shrimp in the ocean or even pigs. He's talking about these particular animals that you would find in your cupboards. And he's saying if this happens, some pots you got to get rid of and break. Other ones you can wash and wait till evening. I'm not even sure he's talking about pigs and things like that right
Because
there.
if I go to a restaurant and they give me a bacon egg and cheeseburger instead of egg and cheeseburger, I'm not going to take the bacon off and eat it because there's bacon grease on it.
I agree.
But I've been to people's houses where they've accidentally put something on the side, and I, to not be rude, just pushed that off the side of my
Yeah.
plate and ate my meal.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I do the same thing. So yeah.
I feel like we. Did anybody else have anything?
I think Narelle had
Oh,
one.
did you
Yeah.
say something? Go ahead. She's behind me. I can't see her.
That's okay.
I was just remembering, when we were reading with the kids where it says the clay pots,
Yes, the
the clay,
pots.
the clay pots, things can seep through, and that's
We
where
talked about
you
that.
probably don't want to cook whatever they're
Right.
eating.
Great
So
minds think
sensitive.
alike. You were going to say the same
It's
thing I
pretty
was.
funny because I do use the
tagine,
tagine,
yeah.
and that's made out of clay, but I don't cook any pork in that. So.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Well, too, that's how like the Black Plague started. Is like a lot of the
Rats.
animals that he's mentioned carry diseases that if they
Fleas,
get and
stuff
stuff,
like
you
that.
can't get rid of it.
Mhm.
Wherein pork does not.
Yeah.
But so that could be the case. But then there's also the other way where, like she said, clay and stone, like certain types of stuff, the grease settles in there and you can't get it out.
Yeah.
I had thought of that because I cook with iron skillets. Is
Yeah.
all I use is my skillets.
That's another good one.
And I've thought of that. I actually have some previously owned iron skillets for other people, and I've redone them and finished I have that thought occasionally. Do I need to get rid of these and replace them with all new, brand new iron skillets? Because they do iron skillets. Like that's how you season them. Is with grease and stuff that seeps into it. That's how you season them so they don't stick.
Wood utensils too, stuff gets.
Yeah.
And you don't wash
But
them
iron
before
can
you
be
put
washed
utensils.
back to get it out, and then you have to re-season it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things you don't. You can cleanse it with fire, or you can, re-season it. You
What
don't.
about an oven? Like, would you not buy a used oven?
If I do, I cleanse it because it's not made out of stone. Only certain things you have to break down, and I think the things that are porous that allow stuff in, you have to break down, and then the other ones you can clean them.
Well, and the oven too. You're not eating from the oven. The oven is just a heat source. It's not like you're eating off of the oven.
Yeah,
It's just
Usually
generating
it's
fire for
inside of
food.
another vessel
Right.
but the clay ovens, like the tandoori ovens, you are
Yeah.
like eating from the oven.
Now, back
Right
to
when you
the
got bread and stuff, yeah, you're right.
and back to the restaurant thing. I often Philip, in particular, he is. He's like, Jessica, we don't eat kosher, and I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, we eat at restaurants. He said they prepare our food on the same grills, the same everything that they have prepared all the other stuff on. They, and so what's everybody's thoughts on that?
Yeah.
But I watched Waffle House. They put I watched them. They put the chicken. I saw them. They put the sausage on one section, the chicken on another section.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with I bet that fry guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I had that same
JoJo gets
thought.
Waffle House every morning.
I watched him cook it. The
I just
sausage
need to
was in
start
a separate
opening our
section
own
than the chicken.
restaurant.
That's what he told
Well-
me. I said,
Kosher
I
king.
He goes, no, eggs are in
Burger-
frying pan.
burger
I
and fried
should
fish
have
cans.
figured that.
Yeah. So I'm not trying, trust me when I say this, I'm not trying to circumvent Yahweh's law. I'm suggesting that a serious reading of Leviticus 11, which we usually only focus on the first part of the chapter and not study on the last part of the chapter, is about the vermins that can get into the pots and pans and not about every unclean animal. And restaurants usually have codes where they come in and search, and they'll shut people down if they have these mice and rats in their things.
Yeah, but what about frying your egg? Like, for instance, when I worked at Dairy Queen years ago when I was a teenager, frying your egg on the same place that they just fried their bacon.
I'm saying that might not be a transgression of the law.
Oh, okay.
I got one right quick before we get to, on the back what you were saying where they sacrificed the meat.
Uh-huh.
You saying so that's not wasn't ever a commandment or against Torah?
There's never a commandment in the Torah specifically about do not eat an animal that's been offered to an idol.
Okay.
You won't find
So
it.
like with Balaam and
Right.
Jezebel. And
Right.
So whenever, just so that I understand that, like
Right.
in Revelations, when he says, but I have a few things against you,
Yes.
like Balaam, who's, I guess with Balak, and
Yes.
continually putting stumbling blocks in front of Israel by having them eaten meat sacrificed to idols.
Yes. It's an allusion or a quotation to Exodus 34. And in Exodus 34, I want to say it's right around verse 15 through 17. He talks about eating meat offered to idols, but it's in the context of worshiping the other mighty one in a ceremonial meal.
So it wasn't like something sneaky they could do, like, here, eat this right here, and then them unknowingly
Yeah.
had nothing to do with that. Okay.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
so for an Israelite to eat an animal that might have been offered to an idol, but yet they're eating it and they're praying to Yahweh and thanking Him for a clean animal,
Right.
they're not worshiping another mighty one just because somebody,
So
amongst...
it's on the worshiping
Sure,
of idols.
it's
back
on.
to that restaurant.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the context
And
of
that's the
Exodus.
same
30.
thing where Balaam, whenever he was
That's
dispatched in numbers, and that's the reason.
yes, and this is why, like Acts 15, one of the first four things the Gentiles had to start out with was to abstain from meats offered to idols.
Mhm.
Number one, due to ceremonial worship. Number two, to the Gentiles, they had this in their mind. They've been doing these ceremonies to these other gods. Paul talks about the stronger and the weaker brother. They're thinking in their mind, I'm worshiping this other god if I eat this. So you have to abstain from that.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it ain't like somebody could trick you and have you sin.
No, you can't. No.
Oh yeah, just talking about the but no.
No,
Makes
you
sense. No, I was just
sin.
thinking about
Yeah,
that.
you sin when you willfully go against Yahweh's instructions.
Right.
Yeah.
They had what to do with it. Okay.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the prophet. I think it was Daniel who was captive and chose not to eat the meat sacrificed to the king, or
Yes.
not sacrificed to the king, but the king had sacrificed to their god.
Yes.
But isn't that an indication of? I mean, he was trying not to sin.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. We see examples in the scriptures of pious men that sometimes go above and beyond what Yahweh requires. And so Daniel wouldn't even drink the king's wine.
Right.
So you know what? I might do the same thing. I'm in a foreign land and I want to show that, hey, I'm different. And I can't. Daniel couldn't worship Yahweh to the capacity that an Israelite could in the land. So he's in a foreign land and he's like, you know what? I don't want your meat. I don't want your wine. Give me vegetables. I'll be all right. So it doesn't necessarily mean Daniel was saying, well, I would be violating Torah by eating an animal that might have been offered to an idol. He's just saying that, I'm choosing not to do this. It's like if a man chooses to go on a 40-day fast. No commandment.
Mm-hmm.
But will it draw him closer to Yahweh? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or it could mean that it was against, so the scripture, I don't think is clear.
Well, it could go either way. And then what we do is then we go back to the Torah.
Yes.
And we ask ourselves, is there a command in the Torah against just the casual eating of a meat offered to an idol? Closest thing we get is Exodus 34. So, study that text out, Exodus 34.
Okay, I can't help but go back to this because this has bugged me about going to my in-laws' house one time for this dinner. So, she had just got done frying a bunch of pork chops.
Mm-hmm.
And then she fried hamburgers in it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the grease was still standing. And she was like, here's your old burgers. And I'm like, Mama, I'm not going to eat those.
Mm-hmm.
And so what would you do in that?
I don't eat them either, Sister Jessica. But what I'm saying is the reason I don't eat them may come from a faulty understanding.
Oh.
Now, I'm just trying to be true to the text of the Torah. And a more detailed explanation would be I could send you the teaching that I did on it where I suggested this as a possibility. And so, I personally couldn't do it either.
I couldn't do it.
But you'd be soaked in the grease anyhow.
In fact, like when she showed me that, I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but I was like, my mouth dropped open, my eyes got big, and I said, what?
Yeah, I know.
I was like, no way.
I know.
Well, not what she don't do it anymore, but she used to try to bring pepperoni pizzas to like my house and stuff, and want to heat it up in the oven. And I'm like, you can eat it, whatever. It's up to you, but don't heat it up in the oven.
Yeah, I usually, in family get-togethers like that, I'll usually ask politely, "Can y'all cook our stuff first?"
I do too.
And most of the time they will.
I used to work in a pizza restaurant, and whenever I would cook my food, like for all my breaks and stuff, I would always change my gloves and wipe down all the cutting utensils and everything. And then also whenever someone else was making my food, I would just ask them, can you wipe down the stuff before you make my pizza and change your gloves? So you can always ask people at restaurants to make special, like, can you clean this before you cook my food on it, please?
I'm allergic to unkosher foods.
I know this is lying, but I know this is lying.
Or just say it's an allergy.
I will tell them that I have an allergy, because if you tell them they have an allergy, they will use separate gloves, separate station.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Separate
that.
oven.
It's even easier too, because they don't give any guff about it either.
No, they're like, if it's an allergy, no problem.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's hard, Brother Matthew, is where we go riding with people. And they're like, oh, we brought our own hot dogs. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. But it gets awkward whenever I'm looking at our friends, and saying, we're going to do our food first because we don't want our food touching what you're going to eat. It gets awkward then.
I know.
Yeah.
Now, piggybacking off the not so literal command of the Torah. Just piggybacking off that. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Which we shouldn't do, go ahead.
Is there any children in here?
Yes.
Oh, never mind. I was gonna say, there's a command for one thing against men doing certain things, but it's technically not in the scripture for women. So how do we combat that issue if we're gonna go with just a literal reading of scripture? So one is wrong for men to live that ultimate lifestyle, but the Torah never forbids women from living that ultimate.
We'll save that for a private conversation. Yeah, that's a good question, but
It's just, to allude, because I know it's implied. I do believe it's wrong. It's implied there.
yeah.
But, like, how do we, and someone brings that up, what's a good response?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I follow exactly what you're saying. Doug?
To get back to what Pat was talking about, Psalms 141:3 says, "Watch, O Yahweh, before my mouth, keep the door of my lips, incline not my heart to any evil thing, to practice wicked works with men that work iniquity, and let me not eat of their dainties." Because it's like a bribe, right? They steal the best food, and you don't take part of that. The king's dainties. King robs his
You break bread with a criminal, they're going to think because it's criminal too.
yeah, and basically bribe changes the heart.
You gave me a thought there. There is a text, I think it's in Proverbs, that says, beware of the dainties of the king,
Proverbs
and put a knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. So maybe it might have something to do with gluttony. That's a possibility. In other words, it's so succulent that you can't stop, and maybe Daniel's saying, no, I'm gonna do a fast while I'm here and eat vegetables and drink water. Just a thought.
Yeah, the word in the King James is dainties.
Yeah, dainties, yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to start getting ready for the Sabbath service, but we've had a lot of good questions and comments and discussion. Let's pray and we can fellowship till our service. Father Yahweh, thank you for your word. Thank you for your instructions. Thank you for people that desire to obey, and we can hash these things out and share thoughts and comments with one another. It's a blessing. We learn, we grow, we get better and better and better. We are able to serve you more like your son Yeshua. Bless our service. Bless every man, woman, and child here. It's through your Messiah we pray. Amen. Amen.